You're listening to Big World at Work.
Out of This World and the Next, Episode 1, written by Bethany Ricks and read by Tawn Krakowski. Melody sat cross-legged on the cluttered desk, where a dark-haired man sat writing a lengthy letter. She stared at him with eyes of fury as he seemingly ignored her. This is what had filled the last 2 days of her existence, meaninglessly wandering the spaceship where her comrades ignored her or left for their own missions to help scout out Mars, leaving her behind. It hadn't been too long ago when she was an important person on this very ship, and no one used to ignore her. To be fair, though, it wasn't their fault they didn't interact with her anymore, at least not after what had happened. Back on Earth, Melody was the head of her field in edaphology, the study of soil in relation to soil-dependent uses. She had studied almost every kind of soil sample, from common potting soil to the samples via the land rovers on Mars. Melody was selected by the International Space Agency to be a part of the first human mission to Mars. She was one of 5 crew members, all of them at the top of their field, like her. There was Captain Adam J. Smith from the USA, Benjamin Willis from Germany, and the love buns, Julia and Kel Heckler, the French married couple. Melody was from England. The man who had been so enthralled with what he was writing came to a stop and solemnly stood up. Melody lithely slipped off the desk and stood face to face with Captain Adam J. Smith, or Cappy for short. He absolutely loathed when anyone called him that, but that was why she so enjoyed it. He easily stood over 6 feet, a good 6 inches taller than Melody. Cappy turned away from her and walked through the metallic door to his left, taking the piece of paper with him. Melody quickly followed suit. In the room that they entered, there sat a small man sitting in front of multiple computer screens with various reports, graphs, sonar, and video on them. This was Benjamin Willis, the computer guy. He was well renowned in the technology world for designing the very first device to be able to sense the movement of non-carbon-based life forms. Ben's head whipped up at Adam and Melody as they entered. In his eyes there was a nearly undetectable sorrow that no one else saw but Melody. She and Ben had gotten to know each other during the year-long training to prepare for their one-way mission to Mars. Ben was the only really close friend she had had in a long time, so it hurt to see him sad. Melody wanted to talk to him and comfort him, but, alas, she knew it would do no good. She automatically sighed. In response, Ben looked at her almost like she wasn't even there, and she flinched at his blank stare. Cappy cleared his throat, causing Melody to nearly jump a foot in the air. She had forgotten he was still there. He glanced quickly to his left where she stood, but immediately flicked his eyes back at Ben and began to speak. "Willis, I have completed the report." Adam tried to hand the long document to Ben, who, rather than taking it, just stared at it like it was some deadly disease. Cappy pursed his lips as the moment dragged on and on. He then promptly dropped the paper into Ben's lap and turned away. "The first half is the report to command. The second is to her family and friends." Melody rolled her emerald eyes and stared into Cappy's deep blue ones. "Come on, Cappy. You have looked into my past enough to know that I have no one back on Earth that is worrying about me." It was true. She hardly ever had time to make friends because of how involved she was with her work. Even when she did have free time, she usually stayed home and read. All her family had died a long time ago. Her father from pancreatic cancer when she was 18, and her mother from a heart attack during Melody's 2nd year in college. She never had brothers and sisters. Now that she thought about it, her mother died right around the same time she had lost interest in anything other than her work. Cappy? Cappy snapped his head with fiery eyes to Ben, who had spoken. Adam? What, Willis? Fury entered Cappy's face as he stared Ben down. Melody frowned at the man in front of her. It irritated her how short-tempered Captain Adam J. Smith could be with anyone and everyone. Well, there isn't much point in sending the second half, Ben said. You and I both know. Just send it, dang you. That is an order. Melody gritted her teeth and was barely able to keep herself from smacking Cappy, a mere watchdog from the military, across the face. She hated how he always assumed he had power over all of them. Hey, Cappy, cool your, rockets, eh? The thick French-accented voice had come from an archway to Ben's right that led to a brightly lighted room. Ben smiled gratefully, while Cappy gnashed his teeth in anger. When Melody heard the Frenchman speak from the other room, it almost instantly broke her frustration and made her smile widely. This voice belonged to none other than Kell Heckler. Cappy stomped through the archway, but before slipping completely through, he barked at Ben. Send both halves to command, and they can decide what to do with it. Ben grimaced as Cappy left him and Melody alone. He buried his face in his hands and shook his head. Sadness seemed to overwhelm Melody, and, before she could stop herself, she gently placed her dainty hand on Ben's shoulder. He immediately flinched at her touch and began to shiver. She gritted her teeth and removed her hand from his shoulder, turning away from him towards where Cappy had disappeared. Melody could feel tears coming, but she forced them back. Oh, how she resented her state of being. Melody needed a place to escape, her sanctuary, her living space. The only way there, however, was to go through the brightly lighted room ahead of her that a loud argument was now coming from. She sighed inwardly and ventured into the battleground. Melody! She winced at her name being loudly flung by the French man, who had abandoned his most recent mechanical project that now lay in a discombobulated mess on his workbench. Kell Heckler was the mechanic and engineer of this expedition, practically their MacGyver. Melody absolutely loved the olden-time attempts of television, her two favorite probably being MacGyver and Smallville. Livingston messed up because she was pig-headed. Cappy's loud yell about Melody interrupted her strange fantasy of MacGyver and Clark Kent saving her from this god-forsaken planet and spaceship. She glared at Cappy's slightly reddened face for his use of pig-headed. For heaven's sake, Adam, her name is Melody. You don't have to use our last names all the time, said Kell. Melody had rarely ever seen Kell mad, but she knew one thing. It was scary. Quietly, she desperately tried to escape from the flurry of words being flung in her name. Melody was nearly at the door on the other side of the room when a woman with light brown hair entered. This was the beautiful and fair wife of Kell. This was Julia Heckler. A gentle frown touched her lips at the sound of the mudslinging. The two rampaging men hadn't noticed Julia enter. Heckler! My name is Kell. Julia marched up to the two Neanderthals, arguing nonsensically. With a quick and loud shout, she yelled between the both of them, Fermez la bouche! Everyone seemed to stop in shock, realizing that Julia was so mad that she had raised her voice and told them to shut up in French. Julia never raised her voice, and she only used French when she was really mad. Kell hesitantly took a step forward, reaching a cautious hand out. Mon amour. No! Julia quickly snapped her fingers at him and lifted both palms toward the two men. All of us have been walking on eggshells after what happened. She looked toward her husband, baring her teeth. Kell, let Adam use his defense mechanism if using only our last names in order to not get attached to us is so important to him. Cappy didn't know how to respond to her statement, but with a shocked face, he slowly nodded. Julia then quickly turned to Adam and sternly pointed her finger at him. "And you! Stop being so defensive and listen to us. You are not the head of the ship." Silently, Melody watched as the small woman reprimanded the two grown men who were much taller than her. It was comical in a way, but she could feel some kind of impending doom crawling through her. The tiny Frenchwoman turned and walked toward Melody, stopping in front of her, but staring right through her as she said, "Melody is dead. There is nothing we can do about it." The tears Melody had held back came flooding out in streams as if they weren't going to stop. Why did Julia have to go and say it? She leaned back on the wall and slid to the floor, clutching herself for dear life. Well, existence. Everything seemed to fall away as she drifted into a self-made darkness. Everything was silent, other than her gasps for breath. Something interrupted her misery. A loud beeping and a clamor of footsteps. Melody slowly opened her eyes to the emptied room. She quickly stood again, ignoring the horrible fact that Julia had spouted out. She went towards the archway into Ben's computer room, seeing the two tall men huddled around him. Trying to listen, she moved close enough to hear what they were talking about without touching them. "Quelle affaire?" Kell asked. "What is it, Willis?" Cappy demanded. "I think there is something living on the surface of Mars."
Visit BigWorldNetwork.com for more e-series samples, or sign up for a $3 a month subscription for full access to all written and audio e-series content, accessible from the website, mobile, or e-reader devices. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Big World Network.